Dinner was supposed to be easy, nothing fancy, just spaghetti, garlic bread, and the kids talking over each other like they always did. My mom, Carol, sat at the head of the table. She liked that seat, said it helped her back. I knew it helped her feel in charge. My son Noah was telling her about school, how he'd gotten picked for a group project, how his teacher said he was a good leader. He was proud. I could hear it in his voice. Carol smiled, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. She waited until he finished, until the room went quiet. Then she said it. "Sweetheart," she said, looking straight at him, "you should work hard. You don't want to end up like your mother." The fork froze halfway to my mouth. Noah blinked. "Like, how?" he asked. Carol didn't hesitate. "She's the family failure," she said, calm, certain, like it was a fact everyone already knew. My daughter Emma looked at me first, then at Noah. Noah's face changed fast. Confusion, then hurt. His eyes filled before he could stop it. I stood up and pulled him into me. He pressed his face into my sweater and started crying. Carol sighed, too loud. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said. "Kids need honesty." I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I rubbed Noah's back and said, "Let's get some air." As I walked him out of the room, I felt something settle into place. Not anger, resolve. Because Carol thought she'd just said something cruel. What she'd actually done was say it in front of the wrong people, and too close to something she didn't understand yet. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is for you right now. My name is Ariel. I was 33 that night. I say that because people hear stories like this and assume weakness comes with age. It doesn't. Experience does. Outside, Noah's crying slowed once the door closed behind us. I knelt down and wiped his face with my sleeve. "What Grandma said isn't true," I told him. Not quickly, not loudly. He nodded, but I could tell the words hadn't landed yet. Emma stood nearby, quiet, watching. I sent her inside to grab Noah's jacket. I didn't want her hearing what came next. Carol followed us onto the porch. She crossed her arms, defensive already. "You're overreacting," she said. "He needs to hear reality." I didn't respond. I buckled Noah into the car, hands steady. Carol leaned closer. "You've always been sensitive, Ariel. That's why you struggle." That sentence mattered. I turned and looked at her then. Really looked. Not at her face. At her posture. At the way she stood when she thought she'd won. I said one thing. "You won't speak to my children like that again." She laughed. Short, sharp. "We'll see," she said. That was the mistake. I drove home with Noah asleep in the back seat and Emma staring out the window. When I tucked them in, Noah asked quietly, "Am I going to fail too?" I told him no. I meant it. And as I sat alone in the dark afterward, I realized something important. Carol didn't just insult me. She challenged the wrong boundary. And the people who enforced that boundary weren't emotional. They were procedural. And they were about to wake up Monday morning. Monday morning started quietly. Too quietly. I dropped the kids at school, smiled at the office staff, and drove home. No calls. No texts. Carol liked noise when she thought she was right. Silence meant she was waiting for someone else to act. At 9:17 a.m., my phone rang. Not her. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in years. Thomas Reed, Carol's partner. I answered. "Ariel," he said, formal, like we were in a meeting. "We need to talk." I didn't ask why. I already knew. "There's an emergency meeting this morning," he continued. "The majority shareholder wants answers." That word landed hard. Majority. I said nothing. Thomas cleared his throat. "Your name came up." Of course it did. Carol had always talked about business like it was family property, like ownership was a feeling, not a document. "What time?" I asked. 10, he said. "Can you be there?" I looked at the clock. Plenty of time. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and opened a folder I hadn't touched in months. Not because I'd planned this, because I'd learned to keep records, agreements, emails, A transfer of shares Carol had insisted was temporary. She'd called it a formality, something to help with taxes. I'd called a lawyer. That was years ago. I closed the folder and took a breath. Carol thought Sunday night was about humiliation, about reminding me of my place. What she didn't realize was that her voice carried further than she intended. And somewhere between that dinner table and Monday morning, someone with actual authority had started asking questions she couldn't talk her way out of. The meeting room was already full when I arrived. Not loud, focused. Thomas sat at the far end of the table. Carol wasn't there yet. That told me everything. When she entered, 5 minutes late, she smiled like this was routine, like she was still in control. She sat down without looking at me. The majority shareholder, Ellen Morris, didn't return the smile. She opened a folder and said, "We need clarity on ownership and conduct, not accusations, questions." Carol laughed lightly. "This is unnecessary." Ellen didn't respond to that. She turned to me instead. "Ariel," she said, "can you confirm when the last share transfer occurred?" I answered calmly. 3 years ago. Temporary. Documented." Carol turned sharply. "That was internal," she said. "Family." Ellen nodded. "Which is why it's in writing." Silence followed. Thomas shifted in his chair. He looked tired. Ellen continued. "There's concern about how personal behavior may be affecting the company." Carol scoffed. "My personal life has nothing to do with this." Ellen closed the folder. "It does," she said, "when it reaches employees, partners, and now grandchildren." Carol finally looked at me, not angry, alarmed, because she realized something too late. Sunday night hadn't stayed at the dinner table. It had entered a system that didn't care about tone, or history, or motherhood. It cared about risk. And suddenly, Carol was the risk being discussed. Carol tried to regain control. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. A familiar move. "This feels like an overreaction," she said. "One comment at a family dinner?" Ellen didn't flinch. "It wasn't one comment," she said. "It was a pattern." She slid a document across the table, not toward Carol, toward me. "Ariel has raised concerns before," Ellen continued, quietly, professionally. Carol's head snapped in my direction. "You said nothing," she accused. I met her eyes. "I didn't say it to you." Thomas exhaled slowly, like someone who'd been holding his breath for years. Ellen folded her hands. "We've received feedback from staff," she said, "about tone, about boundaries." Carol shook her head. "This is personal." "No," Ellen replied. "This is governance." That word ended the argument. Governance doesn't respond to emotion. It responds to exposure. Ellen turned another page. "Effective immediately," she said. "We're reviewing leadership roles." Carol laughed once. Sharp, unconvincing. "You can't do that," she said. Ellen looked at her steadily. "I can," she said, "and I am." I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt relief, because the hardest part hadn't been being called a failure. It had been knowing the system had been protecting the wrong person for far too long. Carol stood up, not calmly, not confidently. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're siding with her?" She gestured toward me like I was the problem in the room. Ellen didn't raise her voice. "We're siding with the company," she said. "That's our job." Thomas finally spoke. His voice was quiet. "We've had complaints, Carol," he said. "Not just now. For years." Carol turned on him. "You never said anything." He met her eyes. "You never listened." That landed harder than anything else. Carol sat back down slowly. Ellen slid one last document forward. "A temporary step down," she said, "while we complete the review." Temporary. The same word Carol had used years ago when she transferred shares to me and assumed I'd never use them. Carol looked at me again. This time, there was no anger, only disbelief. She finally understood the shape of the problem. Sunday night wasn't the cause. It was the trigger. The meeting ended without drama. No shouting, no ultimatums. Just signatures. timelines, next steps. As I walked out, Thomas stopped me. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the kids." I nodded, because that apology wasn't about me. It was about everything he'd let slide, until someone too young to defend himself was pulled into it. And that's when the system finally decided to act. Carol didn't call me after the meeting. That was new. She sent one message instead. Long, careful, and sentimental. This didn't need to happen. I read it once. Then I deleted it. By Wednesday, the office felt different. People spoke more freely, laughed more. Leadership changes do that. Ellen sent a brief update to shareholders. Neutral language, clear boundaries. Carol was listed as on leave. On leave is what organizations say when someone's power has been removed without public conflict. At home, Noah asked if Grandma was still mad. I told him the truth. "She made a bad choice," I said, "and adults have to fix those." Emma listened quietly, then nodded. Kids understand fairness faster than adults do. Friday afternoon, Thomas called again. "Carol won't be attending family functions for a while," he said. "She needs space." Space. Another soft word for consequence. I thanked him and hung up. That weekend, the kids slept better. So did I. Not because I'd won something, but because something unhealthy had finally stopped reaching into my home. Carol had spent years confusing authority with permission. She'd said whatever she wanted and trusted the system to absorb it. This time, it didn't. And once a system learns where the boundary is, it doesn't forget. Neither do children. Neither do I. The following week, Carol tried a different approach. She sent gifts. A book for Noah, a sweater for Emma, nothing for me. The packages sat unopened by the door. I didn't return them. I didn't acknowledge them. Silence had already proven more effective than confrontation. Ellen called midweek, just once. She said the review was progressing, that external consultants were involved now. "That's standard," she said, "when children are mentioned in internal complaints." Children. That word carried weight. Carol had always framed herself as the victim, the misunderstood matriarch, the one holding everything together. That story didn't survive documentation. Thomas emailed later that day. He attached a calendar update. Carol's access had been limited. No meetings. No decisions. I forwarded it to my lawyer, then archived it. At home, the kids moved on faster than I expected. Kids do, when the environment changes. Noah stopped asking questions. Emma stopped watching my face for cues. That's how I knew it mattered. Carol had lost more than a role. She'd lost proximity, and proximity was the only place she'd ever exercised power. Without it, she was just another name on a report, and reports don't respond to guilt. They respond to patterns. Carol had given them plenty. Carol finally called the following Monday, not to apologize, to negotiate. Her voice was controlled, too controlled. "You made your point," she said. "This has gone far enough." I didn't respond right away. She continued anyway. "They're talking about restructuring," she said, as if I'm the problem. I looked at the calendar on my wall. School pickups, work deadlines, a life that had kept moving. "This isn't about me," I said. "It's about what you said to my children." She went quiet. Then, softer, "You're overreacting." That word again. I ended the call. 2 days later, Ellen sent a final update. Carol's role had been formally reduced. No ceremony, no announcement, just a change in title and a change in access. Thomas stopped calling after that. At dinner, Noah told me he'd stood up to a kid at school, said he didn't cry. Emma smiled when she heard that. I watched them both and understood something clearly. Carol thought power was something you exercised outward. A voice, a position, a table seat. She never understood the real kind. Power is what stops reaching you once you draw a line and refuse to move it. And once children see that line hold, they don't forget it. Neither does the system that finally learned where it was. I didn't hear the word failure again. Not from Carol. Not from anyone. She stopped coming by unannounced. Stopped offering advice that felt like judgment. Stopped using my children as an audience. The company moved on quietly. New leadership. New tone. Fewer closed doors. Carol kept her distance. People asked if I felt guilty, if I worried I'd gone too far. I didn't, because none of this started with a meeting, or shares, or power. It started with a child crying at a dinner table. That's the moment Carol misread. She thought she was teaching a lesson. She was actually creating a record. And records don't care who you are to someone. They care what you do and who is affected. Noah doesn't remember the meeting. He remembers that I stood up and left. Emma doesn't remember the words. She remembers that I didn't argue. I acted. That matters more than any title Carol ever had. Some people think consequences are loud. They're not. They arrive quietly, on Monday mornings, in rooms where you don't control the agenda. Carol thought she was speaking the truth. What she really did was say it in front of people who were finally ready to listen. And once they did, everything changed. Not all at once, but enough. And for my children, that was more than enough.